Before the Great War, Dunwich Borers LLC, a mysterious company, made their fortune manufacturing rock drills for boring tunnels. Their rise in the industry was unparalleled, as the market was already well established and had very little room for a new company to come along and take their slice. Yet Dunwich Borers did just that. Little did the other companies know that Dunwich was able to procure government contracts among other private sales, giving them a foothold in the market and a competitive edge over rival companies. To achieve so much in so little time was incredibly suspicious, and some would say you would have to sell your soul to the devil to be so lucky. I say that isn't that far from the truth. The founder and owner of Dunwich Borers was a woman named Constance Blackhall. She had married into the family and lived with her husband in their Victorian manor deep in the swamps of Point Lookout. The Blackhall family were well known for their vast riches and influential power, having helped establish Pilgrim's Landing as a tourist attraction. This commercialization brought many new people to the area in what should have been a profitable venture. But what they hadn't anticipated was the tourists bringing with them the new plague. Constance's husband was one of the many to catch this new plague. He was immediately bedridden, boils covered his body, and without a cure, he died. His vast riches were passed over to Constance, whose grieving was insufferable, and soon she found herself interested in the occult. Her interest spiraled into obsession, and in time she was using her newfound wealth to acquire many archaic texts and artifacts, including one of the most notorious books known to man. This strange fascination with the occult, and the objects she now had, drew the attention of others, a small circle of devotees that worshipped her, and in response she stylized herself a priestess. Together this new sect, a coven you could say, followed the writings of the Krivbeknih, a large leather-bound book said to possess a dark power. This dark and mysterious tome would lead Constance to other items of the occult, an obelisk, a sacrificial blade, and a sleeping giant. To keep things private, she used the rest of her wealth to create a company, Dunwich Borers LLC. With her status, wealth, and now a powerful book, Constance was able to get a foothold in an already full industry, and this illusion of a simple company that manufactured rock drills was the perfect disguise and incentive that she needed to remain undetected. Their office, the Dunwich building, could have been anywhere, but Constance decided that it would be in Washington, D.C., and the reason for that was what lay beneath it. Below the building, deep in the bowels of a dark cavern, sat a monument to Ug-Qualtoth, an Eldritch deity. It had drawn her to this place, and now she would do its bidding. What it wanted was more power, more worshippers and sacrifices made in its name, and she was more than willing, perhaps through the promise of being reunited with her husband. As the legend goes, pressing the Krivbeknih into the obelisk forces those of impure blood to catch fire and burn alive. But if that person was pure, then the book would be consumed and its powers lost forever. Constance was aware of this legend, and fearing the worst, the loss of her powers, she had the obelisk sealed away and returned to Point Lookout, taking the Krivbeknih with her. But Ug-Qualtoth wasn't satisfied with her small circle of followers. It wasn't enough. So she was directed to another location, somewhere she would discover not only an Eldritch artifact, but also the body of a sleeping giant. She was instructed to go to the Commonwealth, where a large formation of marble ran deep beneath the earth, and free this creature. To avoid any unwanted attention, Constance shifted the focus of her company from manufacturing to excavating, and soon large sections of marble were being removed and sold under the guise of a new business strategy. To the rest of the world, Dunwich Borers was merely excavating and selling large blocks of marble, when in reality it was searching for what was on the other side, trapped and patiently sleeping, waiting to be released. and despite being a company that specialized in this field, the operation was a disaster. Many of the workers were overwhelmed with mishaps and accidents that repeatedly ended in death. Complaints were made but dismissed, concerns brushed under the rug, as Constance and a select few who knew the truth wanted the operation to be completed as quickly and cheaply as possible. Because even though they were selling the marble, the company was hemorrhaging money, and to reflect that, the support beams and safety railings were kept to an absolute minimum, only ever being replaced when they were completely rusted, or the roof threatened to collapse and halt their progress. The workers were incredibly unhappy, but to keep them coming back, Dunwich Borers paid them well, and on top of that, they would throw an annual picnic and provided beer at the end of shifts during what they would call happy hour. As you can imagine, alcohol and a shoddily run quarry was a disastrous combination that only ever ended in more death, including the death of a small child that fell from the quarry's edge. Despite all these signs, which some would consider a bad omen, they were encouraged to work faster. More corners were cut, and death followed them deeper into the mine. As more and more marble was shifted, the workers began to feel the ground quake, and the deeper they went, the greater this quaking grew. It was as if the earth was breathing. This quaking made the mine incredibly unstable, more so than it already was, and while work was slowed, it wasn't long until they broke through into an underground cavern. A vision of the future, or flashback to the past, revealed a cult, a butcher donned in religious cloth standing on a platform. Surrounding him were many people, their hands tied behind their backs, helplessly waiting to be sacrificed. Now in the present, the platform has been destroyed, and beneath it, a flooded tunnel leading to both the sleeping giant, whose breathing shakes the very ground, and a sacrificial blade known as Kremvh's tooth. Before Constance could retrieve the blade, and with it, a connection to the sleeping giant, the world was burned along with any hopes she had of getting to it. The workers who had killed themselves to make it this far were also trapped, and now had no choice but to be consumed by the sleeping giant. Surprisingly, Constance survived the Great War. She was unharmed, as was her home, and many of the other people of Point Lookout. Ug-Qualtoth had for some unknown reason kept her safe. Generations would pass and Constance watched in awe as the world around her aged. And so did she, but she didn't die. She had escaped Father Time, a side effect of the book or the obelisk, or perhaps a gift from the deity she now worshipped. Either way, she lived far longer than she had any right to, and it was only when the book was stolen from her did she die. Ug-Qualtoth was done with her, and the Krivbeknih now had a new underling to control, a nameless ranger that had travelled with his son, Jaime, across the country from the Midwest, through Maryland, where the book was stolen, and onwards to the capital wasteland. This nameless ranger tried selling the old tome, as his son would call it, but no one wanted such a thing. Even the scribes of the Brotherhood of Steel refused, and so the ranger kept it, and soon its powers had a hold of him. It wasn't long until Jaime noticed his father acting strange. The old tome, which very rarely left his father's hands, was clearly having an effect on his mind. One night, Jaime was done worrying and asked his father if everything was okay, but his father didn't reply, and the very next morning he was gone. He had abandoned his son, had left him inside a dilapidated hospital without so much as a flashlight. In the morning, Jaime awoke, but he was alone. His father was now missing. The supplies they had gathered the previous night were still there, but his father was nowhere to be seen. Fearing the worst, he got up and tried to find him, but all he found was a trail heading south, and so he followed it, hoping to one day see his father again. Jaime's time following this trail was unpleasant. He sold almost everything he had for food, but that quickly ran out, and then the trail was lost, and he really had no other choice than to go with the first strangers he came across. These strangers, Trev, Tawny and Thor, seemed like okay people, but they soon showed their true colours by killing a family for nothing more than a sack of rotten vegetables. Jaime no longer felt safe with them, and he knew he would be the first to go when things became desperate, and with how little food they had between them, it wouldn't be long until he caught a bullet in the back or woke up with a knife in his chest. As Jaime was thinking of ways to leave the group, a caravan was spotted in the distance, and the raiders he was with were soon running over to see what they could take. But Trev was shot dead, and seeing his opportunity to escape, Jaime then shot Tawny in the back, and while Thor was trying to figure out what was going on, he shot him too. In return for helping the traders, they gave him food, and more importantly, information about his father. They had seen him. They said he was in rough shape and clutching a book to his chest like a newborn baby, and for whatever reason, he was heading south. Not long after that, Jaime began to see signs of his father, snares left behind from traps, warm coals of a dying fire, and footprints leading to a building on the horizon. At the sight of the building, Jaime had this terrible feeling as if he was being watched. The sun was setting, and the shadows through the broken windows stretched on forever. The fear was all-consuming. And then he remembered a story the raiders had told him around the fire one night, about zombies, humans reanimated after death, and how they had been spotted in the area. Slowly approaching the building, Jaime neither heard nor saw any zombies, but inside, he would find out the raiders had been right about these creatures. Almost. What Jaime had found weren't zombies, but feral ghouls, and they were now worshipping the obelisk beneath the building. On the upper levels was his father. He was dead, and if not for the book he clutched between his cold fingers, he wouldn't have known it was him. His face had sunken, his eyes hollowed, and for whatever reason, the feral ghouls hadn't touched him. Deciding to leave, Jaime turned around and started for the entrance, but before he did, he bent down and picked up the book, for it was all he had left of his father, and then he felt it, the warmth of the book, and suddenly the stone around him seemed like a luxury, and if his body was no longer his own, he lay down to rest. He would never leave this place. Soon he began to change, just as his father had changed before him. But unlike his father, who in the end was unworthy of receiving the gift of eternal life, Jaime was. Ug-Qualtoth, through the Krivbeknih and the Nameless Ranger, had guided and enticed Jaime to where he could be controlled, and now he had him, for whatever purpose that was. New names are mentioned by Jaime: Abdul, Alhazared, and Gieth, 3 more instruments of worship, or locations to find such things. We don't know if Jaime was successful in his findings, but we do know he has yet to turn feral. He is still living and worshipping Ug-Qualtoth through the obelisk. His deity is not yet finished with him, and so he stands alongside the feral ghouls whose sole purpose is to worship. And for a long time, that is how things were. Until the book changed hands again. Although this time, Jaime wasn't killed like Constance was, as the book was not stolen, but given to those who had the means to take the book to the next Underling. Back to Point Lookout, to the great-great-great-grandson of Constance Blackhall, Obadiah. Yet the book never made it to him. It was intercepted, stolen by the swamp folk of Point Lookout, and stashed away at their own ritual site, a place where they would drag travellers to be sacrificed in the name of Ug-Qualtoth. Of course, Obadiah wants it back. His obsession with the occult is just as, if not stronger, than Constance's, and he is willing to kill anyone standing in his way, as he is the rightful owner, and to him no sacrifice is too great. And if someone were to help him, unknowingly aiding the forces of evil, then those equally good would find their way to the book. Marcella, a nomadic missionary from the Commonwealth, has learned of the Krivbeknih and wants it destroyed. She knows how it can be done and is willing to die to ensure that it is. But she needs someone with pure blood otherwise it won't work. But in a world where people kill families for sacks of rotten vegetables, where fathers abandon their sons, and evil corporations send their workers to die, do you find that someone? These locations that we know of continue to tempt those with dark souls. Hugo, one of the raiders now inhabiting the quarry, made contact with the sleeping giant. It burrowed deep into his mind and began speaking to him, and Hugo would reply out loud. The other raiders didn't much like this and removed Hugo from the mine and chained the door shut to keep him from going back inside. But still the sleeping giant spoke to him, relentlessly urging him to go into the mine to find him. But then the sleeping giant sensed another more powerful presence, the sole survivor of Vault 111, and knowing there was a very good chance that they would make their way below ground and claim Kremvh's tooth, told Hugo to sacrifice himself as he was no longer needed, as another Underling had come along to take his place.
Guys don't bother me anymore. That's good. I think it's... What was that? Can't they read the signs? I think it's time I go back inside the quarry. It's been too long. No, I can't. The guys would never let me in. I could kill them all. No, that wouldn't be what it would want. It's time to lay down. Yes, of course. It's next to my bed. I will. It's loaded.
The Eldritch powers run much deeper than we know and may ever know. They are capable of connecting two people from opposite sides of the country through generations of time with artifacts that act as catalysts that convinces people to worship them eternally in return for something they desperately desire, or everlasting life. This everlasting life comes in the form of ghoulification, as Ug-Qualtoth seems to be connected to radiation. Wherever an artifact or place of worship is, radiation follows. Oozing from the obelisk surrounding the sleeping giant, Mini-Nuke sits upon the altar alongside Kremvh's tooth. It is always present, and through this radiation, worshippers are chosen and gifted eternal life, so they may eternally worship and sacrifice those too pure to be changed. I wouldn't be surprised if the Eldritch beings are in some way responsible for the Great War. How else have certain humans survived such intense levels of radiation or walked away from nuclear blasts that would have and should have killed them, if not for some intervening otherworldly force capable of turning them into a ghoul in the blink of an eye? The ghoulification process is still not fully understood. Why does one person, under the same conditions as another, die while the other transforms? This could be why. They are simply chosen to transform and are now incapable of dying to Father Time, instead doomed to walk the earth until they feel that unrelenting force pulling them towards a place of worship, where they will remain until the end of time, or until that someone of pure blood comes along and frees them from their eldritch shackles. Be sure to show your support by liking the video and subscribing if you haven't already for more Fallout content. If there's anything you would like to see in a later video, leave a comment and I'll see what I can do. With that said, thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.